welcome. You're watching Head to Head. I'm Antonina Antosha with UATV. The tension between the Ukrainian army and the pro-Russian soldiers in Donbas shows no sign of abating. Despite the Minsk ceasefire agreement, conflict continues to affect everyday life. Today, we want to talk about the experience war veterans embrace upon coming back from the front line. Joining me in our studio today is Jenn Blatty. She's a combat veteran, photographer, writer, and documentarian. Hello, and thank you for joining.
Thank you.
So first of all, let's talk about your combat experience. You've served in the army, right?
Yes.
How long?
I was in the active duty for 6 years.
Mm-hmm. And which front lines did you happen to?
I went to Afghanistan in January 2002 and Iraq in April 2003.
Okay, what were the reasons?
The reasons?
What were your personal reasons for doing so?
Well, that's an interesting question because it's very attached to the project I'm working on here, but because Uncle Sam said so.
Well, okay, then let's jump on the project you're working on here in Ukraine. What's the project?
The project is it's a documentary of, I guess you would say, portraiture and oral history recordings of Ukraine's 2014 volunteers, those that went out to the front lines in the very beginning of the war in Donbas.
For how long have you been working on the project?
Since April of last year.
And what's the brightest thing that struck you most while you've been working on the project?
There are a lot of things, but I think that for me, just like during my war deployments, whether I wanted to go and serve my country or not, it's not even the question because we have to go when we sign a contract to be in the military. When I came here and learned who the veterans of this war were, or who a large majority of them were, that they were volunteers that went out of free will, without pay, without obligation to government, they went out of passion to protect their country and their love for civil rights. And it was very inspiring to me.
You're documenting the life of volunteers on the front line in Donbas. What do you do with the pictures after that?
Well, there's two segments of this. There's the collection of portraits that I've done and of the 2014 volunteers. Some of them are veterans now living in Kyiv. Some of them have since joined the regular Ukrainian armed forces and are still serving in the Donbass. Some of them are still in a volunteer unit, such as the Ukrainian Volunteer Army or Ukrainian Volunteer Corps. So wherever they are, I set up I call it a tactical studio when I'm on the front line to take the portraits. And I do a 1 to 2 hour oral history recording. And this collection, as well as documentary or photojournalistic footage just of the front line in general and of these volunteers in Kyiv and on the front line, are right now scheduled to be exhibited at the Ukrainian Institute of America in New York City in January 2020, and it's already been exhibited in the Ukrainian National Museum of Chicago in May.
Did you have any feedback?
Feedback?
Yeah, what was the feedback?
Feedback was that it was, for me, the feedback was that the Ukrainian diaspora in the United States was very surprised that an American veteran would want to highlight Ukrainian soldiers, and they were very thankful that I'm trying to bring attention to the war in the United States.
Well, you've been to the front line and you've been to the capital of Ukraine. You, as the veteran and having a combat experience, what is the biggest difference that you've noticed between the east of Ukraine and here, the capital?
That there's a huge disconnect between the fact that the war is actually happening and that even though this war is 6 hours away from Kyiv on an express train ride, those that haven't actually gone or that weren't at Maidan or that don't have someone connected to the war, there's a large majority of people that it's out of sight, out of mind.
You're probably right. What's your personal vision of what is happening in Donbas and what had already happened to Crimea?
You mean my hope or my opinion about it?
Your opinion.
Well, I think that not enough is being done to...
By the government?
Yes.
Okay.
And maybe even by my own government. I think that you hear about casualties and deaths. What was it, 2 nights ago, 5 more soldiers died on the front line.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a quick post about it saying 5 soldiers dead, and it's, you know what speck and dump data is. It's so easy for people to disregard. There's usually no names mentioned, or people just, okay, it means nothing to a lot of people, and it continues to happen every day. And even with these soldiers that I've been interviewing and I've come very close to, these volunteers, it is hard for me even to watch them go through the experience of losing comrades, because it feels like it's such a strong community from 2014 that they know each other so well, they're so close, and it's like a week doesn't go by without seeing a candle come up on Facebook to indicate that another friend has died.
Okay. What would you say is the biggest difference, and what do those two have in common, meaning the Ukrainian veteran and the American veteran?
What do the two have in common?
Yeah.
I think that soldiers, war veterans specifically, are an international community, that anyone who has fought a war has a shared connection. And sometimes at the end of the day, once we become soldiers of a government or politicians, despite what we served for, what we believed in, at the end of the day, what we all take away is the community that we've established and the understanding that we have of what it's like being there. I would like to say one of the biggest differences between what the veterans here are facing and what we face as veterans is that when we go to war, when we go to Afghanistan, when we go to Iraq, when we go wherever we go, we're there for a set amount of time and we're sent home. And it's out of sight. I mean, it's not necessarily out of sight, out of mind, but it makes it easier for us to begin a transition. For them here, and that's a part of what I'm actually documenting in a photojournalistic essay, but it's the difference that they have to actually, they're only 6 hours away and the war is still ongoing. How can you possibly even begin to transition when the war is still happening? Because I found through this experience that I myself was drawn back into a combat zone 15 years later. I was drawn to come back to war for a reason, and there's just a simplicity, there's a community, there's an understanding within struggle that I think we crave. And I can't imagine even beginning to try to transition or reintegrate into civilian life when the war is on my own land. When you still feel like, when you're protecting your own land, for us, I'm not protecting my border when I go to Afghanistan necessarily. The war's right there. Like, it would keep pulling me back if I were them. I wouldn't be able to want to leave. And I think a lot of them, it's hard for a lot of them.
What was the hardest thing for you personally, reintegrating back into social life upon coming back from the front line?
I think just anyone that didn't serve, which I was surrounded by all the time, because I feel like the veteran community in the United States were so much more dismantled and all over the place. But just a lack of understanding, I guess, I think for me. I just always felt a little, I guess, out of place. You begin to, when you are deployed, I feel like, things just become more simple and you take those simplicities home with you. You're not upset by as many things. I think that was the hardest thing for me, maybe.
What kind of a piece of advice would you give to Ukrainian veterans, judging from your own experience?
Stick together like they're doing. I mean, they're already doing it, And for those that have not attempted to seek help for psychological trauma, for brain injury, it's time to begin that process, counseling. For a lot of people who have PTSD, it takes a long time for them to come around to realize that they need help. And like I said, it's kind of hard when this war is still ongoing for a lot of people to even get to that place that they want to acknowledge that problem. Seek help, seek each other, stay together.
Stay together. Thank you so much for coming here today.
Thank you very much.
That was Jenn Blatty. She's a combat veteran, photographer, writer, and documentarian. Thank you so much for watching Head to Head. Stay tuned with UATV for more.